If you think nesting die sets are just for cutting layers, think again. In this video, I'm showing you how to turn one die set into a custom gatefold card, layered panels, an aperture card, and even a gorgeous card from scraps you'd normally toss. These dies look simple at first, but with a few clever tricks, which I'll share along the way, you'll see just how versatile they really are. Stick around because you'll walk away with ideas you can use immediately to get more out of the dies you already own. Let's dive in. Today I'm back with another Coco Rosa Studio nesting die set that cuts and scores the most beautiful gatefold cards. If you haven't watched my previous video where I took another similar nesting die set and made 8 different cards and gift tags, I'll link that in the description. Definitely check it out after this one. I'll be using this beautiful Cartabella 6x6 paper pad called Flora number 3. It's full of pretty pastels and some bold designs as well. I've included a detailed list of supplies and card measurements on my blog that's linked in the video description. Here I've already cut out a few panels for card bases, so let's jump right in and start with the first card. All of these are A2 card panels, which means they measure 8.5 by 5.5 inches. Basically, they are A4 size sheets cut into half along the long edge. The dies come attached, but I've already cut them apart when I used it to try out a couple of card ideas so I can show you how it works. If you're wondering, I chose not to use a panel that's wider than the die, so I wouldn't waste the other piece, which would no longer remain A2 sized. It would have just become scrap. This one will work perfectly once I line up the die carefully on the cardstock and tape it down with some washi tape. When I cut out the base panel, the finished card will measure 3 3/4 by 5.5 inches. The design creates a beautiful gatefold card, which I think looks so elegant. I'm using a slightly lighter weight cardstock because I'll be adding layers which will reinforce the base. Heavier weight cardstock would make the card bulky and more expensive to mail. Let me run it through my die cutting machine to cut it out. And here's the panel. The die has built-in score lines that show exactly where to fold, but since the score lines are a little bit light, I'll gently fold back and forth to make the line more prominent before burnishing it to create the gatefold base. Now that the base is ready, it's time to work on the panels. These smaller nesting dies create the front and center panels. I'm picking out a few patterns from the Flora number 3 pad, this floral print for the front, and coordinating one for the inside. Since the paper pad has a hole punched at the top, it actually measures 6.5 inches, so I'll trim it down to a true 6x6 and reserve the scraps for later. The front panel die measures about 2 inches, so I'll cut 2 2-inch strips from this pattern. For the larger inside panel, I'll use a piece that's about 2 3/4 inches wide. Luckily, this pad comes with 2 of each design, so I have enough for the other elements. I also need a scrap piece of white cardstock for the sentiment. Now, everything's ready for die cutting, so let me go off and complete that first. I've got all my die cut pieces ready, and it really didn't take much time. I decided not to cut the sentiment label yet. I'll stamp and heat emboss it first, then cut it out for perfect alignment since it can get tricky trying to stamp on a small scrap. I have all of the components ready for the first card, so let me begin. Here's what the basic layout will look like. The inside layer goes inside, of course. The layered sentiment piece will go right in the center, and the 2 side panels will go on the front. I'll heat emboss the sentiment. I'm using the stamp set I picked up from a trip to India. I love the sentiments in it, and I've never actually used them before. One of them fits perfectly on this label die, so let's go with You're in My Thoughts. I'll trim down a small piece of white cardstock and use my die to make sure I'm lining up the stamp properly in my MISTI since I cut myself a really tight scrap of cardstock. I know I'm a little stingy with my supplies, but I hate wasting them, especially paper. I'll apply anti-static powder to the cardstock and stamp with clear embossing ink. I'm using Altenew's Antique Gold Embossing Powder, which I absolutely love because it's a detail powder and works beautifully with fine script stamps like this one. I'll tap off the excess, but I do see some stray bits of embossing powder, so I'll use a brush to flick off the unwanted particles. I like to run my heat tool for a few seconds first to avoid exposing the cardstock to the heat longer than necessary. That really reduces the chances of warping, and I also find heating the embossing powder from behind gives me a smoother finish since the powder can't fly off when I blow the air from the front. Now I can line up the sentiment die and cut it out. By the way, I forgot to mention that Coco Rosa Studio has very kindly offered a 25% discount if you were to purchase anything from their store using my code and affiliate link. While it won't cost you anything extra, it really helps support my channel so I can continue to bring you more videos. Thank you in advance if you decide to support me today. Now we are ready to start assembling. I'm using my tape runner first to line everything up. It's a temporary glue, so it lets me adjust the placement before I commit with liquid glue, and it's especially helpful with delicate or intricate die cuts. Once everything's aligned, I'm going back in with liquid glue to secure the panels permanently. I have this bit shift here, but that's the beauty of using a tape runner. I can easily lift and realign without damaging the panel or the card base. Now for the centerpiece. I'm keeping the card closed while positioning it so everything lines up nicely. For the next layer, I'll use my foam dots. I'm adding a little liquid glue to the foam dots to give myself some wiggle time so I can slide them around if I have to. More foam dots for the sentiment layer now. I completed the card by adding a few shaker bits as embellishments for a touch of whimsy, and here's the finished card. I was tempted to add a ribbon closure, but honestly this card stands beautifully on its own, so I chose to leave it out. I also added a card panel behind so there's room to write a message. Stick around because in the next part I'm creating another card with the same die set and it's completely different. You won't want to miss it. So for the next couple of cards, I'll use the same frame die, but this time in a completely different way. Instead of creating a full cutout, I'll use it to cut just part of the front panel and make a shaped asymmetrical flap. It's going to give the card a really unique and modern look. I have two card bases and I'll show you exactly how I'll cut these. The card base is almost the same size as the die, just a tiny sliver wider on each side, but that's easy to trim down later if needed. I'll line up the die along the edges of the panel, making sure it's nice and straight. Then I'll secure it with a bit of washi tape before running it through the die cutting machine. This time I'm not cutting the entire panel like I mentioned. I'm only running the top part of the die through the machine so I don't get cut marks or dirt from my machine onto the card panel. needs a little extra pressure to get over the resistance from the machine because of the way the die is placed. There we go. I heard that crack. Now I'll just roll it back and remove the panel. I see the washi tape left a bit of an impression on the card front, but maybe I can fix it later. I'll need to fix these feeler-like things sticking out from the sides here. But first, I'll repeat the same step for the second card base since I'll use a similar technique for the next one. Alright, both card fronts are now cut. I want this panel to be a triangle, so I'll go ahead and trim this part away. It looks a little uneven, but it won't be too noticeable. This side looks better. Alright, the corners are snipped and ready to go. I'll score each base at 4 1/4 inches to create the fold lines. Now I've got 2 asymmetrical card bases ready to decorate. Same design concept, but I'll be finishing them very differently. I'll use this pink and green floral with the green one for the inside because it's more neutral. The pink will be the main layer on the front, and I'll use the green on the inside for contrast. Off camera, I used Gina K's Dusty Rose ink and this pearlescent embossing powder from Brutus Monroe to create the sentiment. It's a very fine script, so the shine is quite subtle and you might not see it well on camera, but in person it has a soft pearly shimmer. I'll go ahead and die cut the pieces and start assembling. I have everything cut and ready to go. I used the reverse side of this pattern paper from the previous card. Because the pad is perfectly coordinated, the colors blend beautifully together. I'll decide which combo works best, the pink on the outside and pattern on the inside, or the other way around. Honestly, both look great, so I'll keep going. I'll use my tape runner first to position everything again. I see some kind of a mark here, so I'll erase that first before proceeding with laying out the elements. I'm looking for an even margin around the borders and also want to ensure both panels are at the same level. Now they're all aligned, I'll secure the panels with liquid glue. Finally, I'll add the centerpiece. I'll pop up the top 2 layers with foam dots and a little glue so I can slide them into place, and of course it will also provide extra hold. For a touch of fun, I'm adding a few shaker bits again, just a few will be plenty. And that's it. This one's done too. It's elegant, dimensional, and stands beautifully on its own again. 2 cards down, and the next one is my absolute favorite, so keep watching to see how I take this design up a notch. As you can see, I've created a ton of scraps from the first two cards. So I picked out these two pieces, and honestly, I have no idea if this is going to work. I'm just going to find out on the fly and see if I can use up at least a few of these scraps. Let me clear away these tiny bits first. Here's what I'm planning. I'll layer these two scraps together. This larger one can sit on the top since it will cover more of the card front, and this other one can go underneath as another layer. I'm not exactly sure how I'll do the sentiment, maybe across the front or perhaps a small diamond label near the corner. We'll figure it out as we go. First, let me even out the corners. Now, I'll trim it as straight as I can. It's not a perfect triangle, but that's okay because, as we say, this is handmade, not Hallmark. I'll keep a narrow margin, so I want the panel to sit this way. So I'll mark my cut lines with a pencil. And knowing my cutting straight challenges, I'm definitely using my trimmer for this. There we go. One piece done, and that's going to make a nice layer. Now for the second one. Since this will sit underneath, the uneven edges won't really show. But it does seem like this arrangement won't really work since this panel is a little bit too short. Maybe I'll flip the layers and have them this way. I think that's better. Let's trim these down a bit more so I can create an even border on all sides. I'll mark the cut lines again and trim the pieces down. Honestly, I'm totally winging it now. If this works, fantastic. If it doesn't, well, you'll have to forgive me. I'll leave this part in so you can see what didn't work and why. I always leave in my mistakes though, since they're great learning points. I'm lining up the piece with the grid line on the trimmer so I know it's straight. Alright, let's glue this down lightly so I can still move it around if needed. And look at that, even just this layer looks really nice already. I think that was a good call. Now, do I want to add another piece over it? Maybe not. I can just layer the sentiment on top instead. I'll probably use 2 layers for the sentiment piece. Let me cut those labels and I'll be right back. I'm back to finish the card. I've already cut a side panel, so I'll adhere that first, making sure everything is level. Now I'll go over all the base layers again with glue to secure them properly. I die cut a vellum layer using the largest die, heat emboss the sentiment in white, and offset it slightly to the left because I plan to add some of my heat embossed vellum flowers and leaves as embellishments right next to it. I use these heat embossed vellum flowers and leaves very often as embellishments. If you want to see which Altenew stamp set I used to make them, it will be in my list of supplies. Vellum is see-through, and since this pattern paper is so pretty, I didn't want to cover it up with solid cardstock. The vellum just softens the background enough to draw attention to the sentiment while still letting the pattern show through. Let me glue everything down before proceeding to the next step. For the sentiment panel, I'm using foam tape for some dimension with a touch of liquid glue to give me time to position it. Now it's time to arrange the vellum flowers and leaves. If you've ever struggled with how to glue vellum, I did a whole live stream on different adhesive techniques. I'll link that video for you as well in the description. Do check it out because it's full of gluing hacks. For now, I'll arrange the pieces the way I want them and use press and seal to pick everything up in one go. If you don't have press and seal, you can just take a photo of your arrangement and glue the pieces one by one. But if you do have press and seal, seriously use it. It's genius. I learned this trick from Jennifer McGuire, and a fun fact is that her husband invented press and seal. So Jennifer pretty much invented this hack. Now I'll add a tiny dot of glue just behind the flower centers so I can adhere them to the label. That's where I'll be adding gems later so the glue won't show through the vellum. I'll press everything down, remove the press and seal gently, and fix any loose pieces. There, all secure. I think I'll add a couple more leaves for a fuller look. Now for the finishing touch, I'll add 3 Pinkfresh Studio gems to the flower centers. I was torn between the lighter and darker shades of pink, but I think the lighter one works better here because it looks more delicate, which is the vibe of this card. I'm keeping it simple because I really love the clean look, and this card is finished. So here's the final card. By the way, you can watch the previous nesting dies video for more ideas. I didn't want to repeat them all over again in this video. As you saw, I had a lot of scraps left over, so I decided to create one more card. I cut out these 2 panels, and I also have a piece of acetate ready along with a frame I made using the largest and smallest diamond dies. I laid them out like this, and if you want to see how I keep the frame symmetrical, the previous nesting dies video has that hack as well. For this card, I'll also use the middle die to create an aperture and use the acetate on the window. I'll stamp a sentiment using this Dollar Tree stamp set here. But first, I need to find the center for the aperture. I'm using some temporary adhesive to help create the layout so I can position everything accurately before cutting. Next, I'll open up the card and pass it through my die cutting machine. There's a tiny rip here and there from the glue, but it won't matter because most of this area will be covered by the side panels. I think I need to clean my cutting plates because I seem to be getting marks everywhere. Now it's time to cut the acetate down to size. I used the largest and smallest diamonds to create the frame. So now I'm going to use the middle die to cut the acetate and ensure the acetate fits perfectly behind the frame. I'll add a few rolled up pieces of washi tape to hold the card closed, even though I'm using the magnets. They'll allow me to keep the magnets to the sides so they don't interfere with the stamping. I'll create the sentiment and I'll use this stamp since it fits perfectly in the aperture. If you want more card making hacks, I have a few on my channel that you can watch later. I'm double checking placement and making sure everything is centered before I stamp. This acetate sheet came from a stamp set, I believe, and it's such a handy trick from Gina K of Gina K Designs. The the sentiment is stamped, I'll prep the aperture. I'll remove the protective film from the acetate piece and adhere it to the frame, which will cover the aperture on the card. Since glue takes time to dry on acetate, I'll give it a few seconds while I adhere the side panels. To complete the look, I added a few iridescent sequins for a touch of sparkle. And there you have it. Now I have 4 cards, each with coordinating envelopes made from leftover scraps. I used the strips I trimmed out from the tops of the pattern paper to create the envelope flaps, making sure everything coordinates beautifully. This set shows just how versatile nesting dies can be and a great way to use your scraps to create multiple cards and envelopes. And the best part is these dies cut and score at the same time. So there's no measuring, no complicated cutting, perfect for those of us who go cross-eyed over numbers in straight lines. And another reminder that there's a 25% discount on Coco Rosa Studio dies using my code and affiliate link. That's in the video description. If you're interested in seeing how I used just dollar store items to make 4 beautiful cards, you can watch that video here.